The Dalai Lama said, compassion is not religious business. It is human business. It is not luxury. It is essential for our own peace and mental stability. It is essential for human survival. You know, a few years ago, I found myself just watching the news, just getting so upset. And I just thought, why am I putting myself through all this? So I really have backed off watching the news. I tune in maybe once a week just to kind of get a general consensus of what's going on. But I have problems hearing about all the violence that's going on in the world. You know, and even the violence that goes on in this country, it's awfully hard to hear sometimes. You know, and sometimes I want to just kind of pull back from the Old Testament philosophy of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Can we move into something that can shift human behavior so that we can diffuse the world from the wars that break out, the violence that breaks out? Sometimes we need to shift our mental image about those who actually use violence, thinking that that's going to fulfill their needs. We may call them terrorists or fundamentalists of whatever faith, or the other, or the enemy. If we can boil out all the pain and hurt that violence brings down to a common denominator, what thinking leads to violence the most? Perhaps it is the idea that we have enemies. Enemy thinking separates us from each other like no other thought. We can justify whatever we do to another because they are the enemy and they deserve to be punished. I know when my husband used to do his crime prevention workshops, he said one of the first thinkings that happen for people that commit crimes against others is to objectify them. That they're no longer a person that become an it or a thing or represents a group that you hate, or, you know, just that you have to make them into something other than a human being. And once we can shift that into seeing the humanity, and sometimes that's not an easy thing to do, but they are still human beings, even doing all the violence. I recently had someone that was really angry at me about something. I'm not going to get into the details about it. But I thought, how do I diffuse this? And I went back to, I've done a lot of work with nonviolent communication that Marshall Rosenberg developed. I don't know, we did a class on that. I think maybe some of you were in that class years ago. And but I thought, how do I diffuse this person without getting into, well, you're this and you're that, because that's kind of our natural defensive. And the first thing I said was, when you said this, this is what I heard. And she looked at me and she goes, oh, but this is what I meant. And I went, oh, and we were fine. Mm-hmm. And it was just using a little bit of, I didn't make her wrong. I was just saying, this is what I was hearing in that conversation. And then she could say, but this is what I was meaning. And then we laughed about it and we were fine. And I thought, you know, I just love falling back on nonviolent communication because it doesn't make the other person wrong. It helps us just to clarify how we're communicating. And most people can't read our thoughts, right? We think they are. Isn't it just obvious when I said this? Right. It doesn't work that way. Well, I came across a story that puts nonviolence into action and how to shift that mental image of being defensive or being accusatory or just being enraged at others. And this story, I used this in a talk way back in 2006. But I read this and I thought, what a great story. And it was put together, y'all know who Greg Tamblyn is? He's a New Thought musician, and he was attending an international conference. And I love hearing this story because this is when we can use nonviolence in action at the moment that it's happening. So this is what he put in his story. He said, "You ever have a brilliant gift idea that turned out to be the most embarrassing and humiliating thing you could have brought to the party? At a conference on consciousness, we were told to bring a small wrapped present to exchange as a means of getting to know each other. The gift was supposed to be related to something significant in our lives. After racking my brains for a while and looking around the house, I found the perfect thing. A lighter I had brought back from China. It was a souvenir from the first time I ever hosted a group tour, which has become a yearly event since then." He said, but this was no ordinary lighter. It was a solid lighter with some heft to it, covered in bright red enamel. On one side, the imposing face of Chairman Mao stares out at you, totally out of context on this goofy trinket. Sort of like Abraham Lincoln on a box of Wheaties. But the kicker is that when you open the top, it plays a silly and quite frankly annoying Chinese marching song, which squeals on and on, lit or not, until you close it, or until the battery runs out. Should you leave it open for a few days as a sort of Chinese torture for the unlucky people you live with. In short, it's pretty funny, and it kind of reduces Mao to the status of a cartoon, which I like. I've given a few of these away to friends, and everybody gets a kick out of them. My brother likes to walk down the grocery store aisle with his lighter held aloft, music blaring and people staring. I think he does it to embarrass his daughter, but I digress. So I felt quite proud of myself for bringing this funny, clever gift that I knew everyone at the conference would find amusing. The first night, all 120 of us were sorted into small circles of 8 and instructed to put our presents in the middle. One by one, we took turns choosing a gift that someone else had brought, and then we took turns unwrapping them. When someone opened the gift you brought, you explained what it meant to you, and so we'd get to know a bit about each other. But what happened in our little circle was a kind of cosmic joke. Imagine, out of all the 120 people at this event, the one person who ended up with my little wrap package containing this incredibly funny, brilliant, clever, totally unique Chairman Mao lighter just happened to be the childhood, lifelong friend, as well as the official biographer of the Dalai Lama. He said, I'm not kidding. His name was Kuno, and he was seated just to my left. As soon as I saw him pick up the little package, I felt myself shrink about 5 sizes. What I really wanted was to disappear altogether. If humiliation was a color, would have been a bright purple 4th of July smoke bomb, just fizzing away into nothing. I didn't know there would be a Tibetan at this conference. I didn't know there would be a man who, as I later found out, actually fought Chinese soldiers and was forced to flee into exile as they took over and brutalized his country. All the time we were going around the circle, opening presents, I was sitting there completely freaked out at the fact that I brought the most insulting gift I possibly could have, and it was going to be unbearably awkward when this gentle, elderly, dignified, much-loved man opened it. Unbelievably embarrassing. Life-shattering buckets of shame. For once in my life, I've been just a little too clever, and my sick sense of humor had come back to haunt me. How could I possibly explain this to him? What could I say? Especially when all the other gifts were so thoughtful and beautiful. What would he say? What would he do? When it got to be my turn, I suggested we switch presents. Why? He asked. Because I don't think you're going to like it. I want you to have something you'll like. No, he said, I choose this one. Slowly and calmly, he unwrapped the lighter. He turned it over and for a minute just looked at the picture of Mao. I can't remember if he opened the top and played the little song. After what seemed like forever, during which time I would have gladly traded my whole life to be somewhere else, he spoke. "Oh," he said firmly, "this is karma." He looked at me with steady, sincere eyes and said, "This will help me remember to practice compassion." This is powerful enough just to hear this story, but there is a postscript to this, that when Greg received a letter, a friend at the conference reporting on how Kuno described this experience. He said, "Dear Greg, I love that you tell the story about your lighter, but you must tell more of the story. The way you ended it made it sound like he was being polite, but it was much more than that. It was huge and it was wonderful. You should have heard Kuno's talk at the International House after the conference. He began to talk about his history and the connection with the Dalai Lama. And he briefly mentioned his important role as a general in the war. He spoke about how the Chinese killed his parents, family members, and so many of his friends. He talked about his anger at the Chinese, so much anger. He talked about how the Dalai Lama told him many times he needed to make peace with the Chinese, to not hate them, to have love in his heart, compassion, forgiveness. He saw no way to do this. It was impossible. He hated them all to such an extent that he wouldn't even eat Chinese food. The Dalai Lama would laugh at this and tell him that Chinese food is very good and his anger is making him miss out on some very good things. Well, before the conference, Kuno was visiting a site of one of the bloody battles between China and Tibet, where he lost many friends. He was at the memorial, trying to make peace, but only feeling anger, pain, and sadness. He began to cry. A couple was there crying also. They and Kuno started talking about their losses and began bonding. After a while, they decided to go to a place for some food and to talk more. During the meal, each asked where the other was from, and it turned out that the couple was Chinese. He had thought they were on his side, not theirs. Karma again. They continued their meal together with new understanding. This experience totally changed his perspective. He wanted to continue healing, so he then started trying to get to know Chinese people. He tried Chinese food and liked it. And when the conference organizer invited Kuno to be with us, he also wanted to be set up some lectures for Kuno in the area and offered to let him stay at his house. Kuno told him that he would like to do the lectures, but he wanted to stay with a Chinese family if possible. The organizer said that would be very easy to organize since his foreign exchange student host family lived nearby, and they just happened to be Chinese. Coincidence? I think not. Kuno stayed with the Chinese family before and after the conference and had a wonderful time in their home. After a couple of days with them, he came to our conference and received your lighter. At this point in his lecture, he held up your lighter, lit it, and played the little song. He told the story of getting the lighter at the conference, of all the groups he could have been with, of all the wrapped gifts he could have picked. He picked you and yours. It was a gift supporting his new path to healing. At the time you picked the gift, you didn't know about how his newfound attempts at healing this pain in his heart, but you helped the process and supported his new path. I bet the Dalai Lama had a big belly laugh when Kuno told the full story to him. It's a full circle thing. If I were you, I'd be honored to be part of that healing circle. Jesus said, "Judge not, lest you be judged. Forgive as you have been forgiven." They're not easy things to do. I can't even imagine being in Kuno's place, knowing that family and friends had been killed, yet finding a way to forgive. Jesus said, how many times do we forgive? No. 70 times 7, which means you forgive until it's done. 7 is a sign of completion in the Mideast, and every time you put a 0 on the end of it, it intensifies it. So it means you keep forgiving until you actually have got it done. When we can move to the place where there are no enemies in the world, just souls attempting to evolve in ways that work and ways that don't work, maybe we can find some answers. Maybe we can find that connection. Maybe we can find that compassion. In other words, when we can master forgiveness and compassion becomes our way of being, then peace begins not only in our lives, but in the world. May you find your place for peace this week. Thank you.